My name is Rob Groves. I'm an associate professor of classics in the Department of Religious Studies and Classics at the University of Arizona. I'll be reading the story of the Horatii. The story I'm about to tell you is a violent one. It comes from ancient Rome, and violence was a familiar part of Roman life, but it might not be appropriate for everyone today. The story also demonstrates Rome's values about community, values which are pretty different from our own. It was the early days of ancient Rome, which was not yet a great empire, but just a small city in constant conflict with its neighbors. The Romans were fighting against the nearby city of Alba Longa, and it just so happened that among both the Romans and the Albans there was a set of male triplets. The three sons of the Roman Horatius were called the Horatii, and the three sons of the Alban Curatius were called the Curatii. The two families were even further connected. Camilla, the sister of the Horatii, was engaged to one of the Curatii, but we'll come back to Camilla in a minute. The Roman king and the Alban dictator made an agreement to protect their people. Rather than a full-out war that would cost many lives, the issue would be settled with a kind of duel between these two sets of triplets. Whichever city's trio won the battle would have rule over the other city. Both the Horatii and the sons of Curatius prepared themselves and stepped out into the battlefield, swords in hand, as their communities sat down to see whether they would have triumph or defeat, whether they would rule the other city or be ruled by it. When the signal's given, the two lines of three young men charged at each other, none of them thinking about their own lives, but just about the fate of their fellow citizens. As the weapons rattle with the first attacks, the shining swords flash, the crowd on both sides trembles in fear and dares to hope, their voice and breath paralyzed. Suddenly there's blood, and the battlefield is full of shouting. All three of the Curatii are injured, giving great hope to the Romans. But then, first one and then another of the Roman Horatii falls to the ground, critically injured, never to get up again. The three Curatii are all injured, but they are all alive. Only one Roman is alive, the young Publius, but he was still uninjured. Publius knew that as brave and fierce as he was no match for them, 3 against 1. So he runs, not fleeing the battle, but putting some space between himself and the Alban triplets, space which they would cross at different speeds since they were all differently injured. He runs quite far away. Looking over his shoulder, he sees one of the Curatii closing in on him. Suddenly Publius turns around and attacks. The Albans yell for the other Curatii to hurry up and help their brother, but by the time they catch up, it's too late. The second brother arrives just in time to see the first fall dead at his feet. Publius presses the attack on the second brother, as the third, the most injured, closes in. The Romans shout encouragement to their champion, and the momentary distraction gives Publius the opportunity he needs. Brother number 2 falls. Suddenly the odds are even, 1 against 1. Except the odds aren't really even. The Alban is hurt and tired and has just seen his 2 brothers die in front of him, while the Roman is uninjured and is on a roll. As the Alban struggles to fight, Publius calls out triumphantly, "I have sacrificed 2 men to the souls of my brothers. This third one I sacrifice to Rome, so that this war may end and Rome may rule Alba Longa." He plunges his sword from above and the battle is over. The Roman hero takes the defeated Alban warrior's cloak and presents it to his father. The Romans celebrate as they envision what this victory will mean for their people, while the Albans fall into despair, imagining what it will mean for theirs. The dead on both sides are buried with honor as their leaders make final arrangements for the transfer of power. As the Romans make their way back to Rome, the Romans crowd around Horatius to celebrate him as the man who sacrificed 2 of his 3 sons to save so many lives and to empower their community. As they approach the gates of Rome, the women of Rome crowd around to find out their fate. Horatius holds up the cloak of the Alban warrior. The crowd of Roman women begins to celebrate, but one woman falls to the ground weeping. It's Publius' sister, Camilla, and the cloak was the one she had made for her fiancé, the son of Curatius. She calls out her dead fiancé's name. Publius was enraged to see his sister weeping at this moment of his great triumph, and still hot from the battle, he pulls out his sword, shouting, "If you care more about your fiancé than your brother or your sisters, go join your fiancé." And then he stabs his sister to death. The Romans were horrified, and Publius was brought to the king to stand trial. But the king was in a tight spot. Surely killing a member of your own family was a shocking and horrible act. But Publius was a war hero whose strength and bravery had saved many lives and just won them the war. The king worried that if he convicted Publius of murder, the community might rise against him. But if he found him innocent, they might do the same thing. So he turned the case ultimately over to the people to decide, Rome's first trial before the community as a whole instead of the king. Publius's father Horatii spoke in his son's defense, saying that his son's actions were not wrong since Camilla had given priority to her private grief over the public celebration. He also tearfully begged them, since he had already lost 3 of his 4 children in such a short time, not to take away his last. The people were moved by his speech and his tears and decided to ignore the law and find Publius innocent of murder. Horatii was required to perform sacrifices to prevent Camilla's ghost from taking out her anger on the city, but no further punishment was required. What I think is especially shocking about this story to a modern audience is how the Romans used this story to teach an important lesson, that for a Roman, duty to your community was more important than your family or just your individual feelings. Horatii sacrificed 2 of his sons to save his community, while Camilla honored her loss and the loss of her fiancé over the community's victory, and she died for it. The Romans weren't totally at peace with this story, as is demonstrated by the king's fears and by the trial itself. But even in an impossible situation where someone had to choose, a Roman was always expected to put their community first.